let's bring it back to America. The show Glee, which apparently threatens some people. You say it makes...
threatened by Glee.
My colleague Glenn Beck, who I like a lot, says it's a nightmare all about self-gratification.
Oh, he's a gum-flapping pumpkin head. He doesn't know what he's talking about. It's a wonderful piece of artistry, and I marvel at what they're able to do week after week. And by the way, for anyone who was a misfit in high school, it doesn't matter if you were a band nerd or a thespian or an in-the-closet jock. You can look at the characters on this show and feel something for them and relive it.
And in a way, I think this self-gratification is what everything is about. Whether we do good or we do bad, or if we give to charity or something, we're trying to gratify ourselves in a way. So what's wrong with self-gratification? It's loony.
Other
John?
I think it's okay.
Where do you stand on that?
Well, okay. The American Family Association says Glee glamorizes homosexual behavior. It can turn...
Done and done.
The kids will go to hell.
Well, no.
We were hearing about this in the mid-1980s from Tipper Gore and the Parents Music Resource Center. A lot of us grew up around that time.
Thank God for Frank Zappa.
Yeah, Frank Zappa and John Denver. Yeah. John Denver was in the trenches too.
Dee Snider.
Rocky Mountain High. Tipper Gore thought this music was satanic. That we were teaching, the Prince was teaching people how to masturbate. And look, the culture, not as a necessarily recorded culture, but just in terms of crime and like general decency, is so much better. If all this
people
music...
don't know that. Crime is down, unwed pregnancies are down.
New York's nicer, although Kurt's kind of bent out of shape about those tables on Broadway, but it's different than it was before, and for the better. If all this music was coarsening and awful and corrupting culture, then why is the world a infinitely much more free, prosperous, and interesting place than it was 20 years ago?
And it goes back even further. I mean, in 1954, there were Senate hearings on comic books, because comic books were felt to be destroying the youth of this great nation because they were so gruesome. They were horror comics, and the country was going to collapse. That hasn't happened for some reason.
Under a certain administration, couldn't you see the same thing happening with video games, though? I mean, couldn't you see congressional hearings on video games?
They had them, and they proposed banning some of them. And I was relieved. I didn't realize this, but it used to be against the rules to show a couple even sitting on a bed, sharing a bed on television, and the TV show Bewitched was the first show that did that. And we survived.
It's amazing.
We always survive is the point. I mean, all pop culture, popular culture, especially music, speaks to the desires of young people. And young people want to be exploring their freedoms, running against the leash of their parents or their communities. And they're confused about love in these things. It is a self-centered type of art form. That is the point. People need to find their self-expression. It is, by definition, anti-authoritarian. There's a reason why authoritarians hate this stuff, because they know that it works.
And by the way, there are some really great bands out now who follow in the same vein, which is do it yourself, because the music industry really collapsed and allowed people who realized they weren't going to make any money to write and produce their own records from their bedrooms, and now people are able to do that with GarageBand on a Mac.
More of Declaration of Independence. So thank you, Kurt, Kennedy, Matt. Stick around, because on Facebook somebody wants me to say, if you vote Libertarian, you're throwing away your vote. So our audience next will get to question you about that. We're back with our guests, Nick Gillespie and Matt Welch, authors of the new book, Declaration of Independence: How Libertarian Politics Can Fix What's Wrong with America. First, then, from my Facebook page, Carrie Wolf basically says, what are you talking about? By voting Libertarian, you throw your vote away.
I'm not telling anyone to vote Libertarian.
But for anybody who does.
Voting is a totally personal act. People vote to make themselves feel better. Voting doesn't necessarily have a huge impact on things. By our point is...
What do you mean it doesn't have a huge impact on things?
Well, if
do you remember the 2000 election, John, at all?
If you live in the District of Columbia like I do, where it's 90% Democrat, you're not really going to affect the way the District of Columbia votes about a presidential candidate, for example. But our point is, declare independence from politics, from the two main parties. Choose your own reason to vote, or own party or bloc to support or not support, and from there you can build a more interesting politics.
and the best of life is outside politics.
Yeah.
Always.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it feels like that for Republicans and Democrats share a lot of blame for the economic mess that we're in right now, yet it seems like there's a revolving door to Washington. Why aren't they being held accountable? Why do they keep cycling through?
Well, you know, I think they are being held accountable, not as fast and not as quickly or definitively as they should be. But Democrats come and Democrats go, Republicans come and Republicans go. What we need to do is to stop the bipartisan bailout economics. We need to stop the bipartisan warmongering that's going on. We need to have politicians who are going to change the way entitlements are funded, or even if they exist at all, and how education gets delivered and things like that. And I do think we're seeing change in that because people are leaving the major parties and they're voting out bums and putting in new people who have a short period of time before they become bums.
In your opinion, why do you think that people who advocate for things like gay rights or abortion rights or gay marriage, they tend to identify themselves as being on the left when it seems it makes more sense for them to be libertarians where nobody cares what they do with their own personal business? Why do you think there's this lack of understanding or this schism that thinks that those issues belong on the left rather than in the Libertarian Party?
It certainly doesn't help that most of the major candidates for the Republican presidency are nattering on about keeping traditional marriage and constitutional amendments to prevent gay people from marrying, with the exceptions of Ron Paul and Gary Johnson, maybe. So there's a reaction to existing politicians who keep talking about it, who keep bringing this stuff up. So that is reason. But you point to something that's totally right. It is kind of bizarre, these collections of politics. Why does someone who believes in fiscal conservatism need to somehow think gays shouldn't marry? What is the connection there? I don't see it at all, and I think you will start to see some of these things split apart, especially as Democrats realize that Obama is a no-good-nick when it comes to the drug war, when it comes to civil liberties, when it comes to Guantanamo Bay, when it comes to waging war. He was terrible on all of it, and that's why they voted for him. So that, I think you're going to see a defection from him and a realization you put your faith in a leader. That was the mistake. You know?
All right, speaking of waging war, it's one legitimate role for government, defense, protect us. So from Facebook, Brian Thompson asks, what does a libertarian think about the war on terror?
Well, you know, I'll put it out there. You know, terrorism is a bad thing. It's a horrible thing. It is absolutely legitimate for the government to hunt down and quarantine, destroy, if they're in the act of violence, to kill terrorists. This is not controversial with anybody. What that has to do with the global war on terror that was inaugurated by Bush, you know, after, you know, it makes sense to do that after 9/11. It would have been even better if he had started earlier with a massive national security infrastructure in place, you know, that they couldn't prevent 9/11. But beyond that, what does that have to do with shaking down grandmothers and infants while they're walking through security airport lines, things like that? We spend billions and billions and billions of dollars protecting us. And most of that has nothing to do with terrorism, and it doesn't stop terrorism. So the war on terrorism is a good idea, but we should clarify what that means.
Yes.
Given our current political system, how can we possibly de-incentivize pork barrel spending and entitlement programs for our politicians?
It's tough.
Yeah.
You know, by supporting people who campaign on it. Find people who agree with you on this and nothing else. And if that's that important to you, then try to effect change, not necessarily by believing in the parties, but by knocking on the door.
You wanted to follow up? Go ahead.
Yes. I totally agree with you guys that we definitely should support people who...
You are a great American.
That's what I'm told. So I totally agree with you guys that we should support politicians that say that they're going to cut spending on all these unnecessary programs. But at the same time, isn't that the only way that they can get reelected time and again?
Generally speaking, don't believe in the politician. Try to find, you know, ways to impact the system from outside of it rather than, you know, supporting a single human being.
And it's worth not being a nihilist when it comes to politics. There are cases, you know, New Zealand did this, Canada did this, the U.S. did this after World War II. They dramatically ramped down the amount of spending, both in absolute terms and in relative terms as a percentage of economic activity. Political change happens.
And they're
we know
doing
it happens
better.
all the time.
Canada is thriving and has less unemployment than we have. We're out of time. Thank you, Nick and Matt. Coming up next, they say the future is so bright, you have to wear shades. I'm not so sure, though. My take when we come back.
Wear shades.
Our future's so bright, we'll have to wear shades. So say the optimists from Reason, but what are they talking about? Look at that. That's how many rules just the feds added last year. 80,000 pages of minutia that regulate nearly every aspect of our lives. And they do this stuff every year. And this doesn't include the rules state and local governments pass. Every one of these things, every rule in here, this is government force that takes away someone's freedom to do what they want to do. And look at this chart. It shows how much the government spends every year, and it's just growing and growing. It's on a path that's unsustainable. And yet, if any politician sensibly says it is unsustainable, it suggests limiting the growth of the biggest program, his own constituents yell at him. That's what happened to Representative Daniel Webster from Florida.
It's rationing. That's what you want to do. It's ration Medicare.
The people are the big people. I'm tired of it. He's not doing the job he's supposed to do to represent me. And I'm sick and tired of it.
So given the growth of government and those people's attitude, what is there to be optimistic about? America's on a road to bankruptcy. How is the future so bright we'll have to wear shades? Well, maybe because outside politics, the human spirit and human ingenuity is so powerful it can overcome the stupidity of politics. Look at the good things that have happened outside politics. Today, Americans live longer and healthier lives. Every year, life expectancy increases. We're richer than ever. Despite all the impediments to capitalism, more people are prosperous. And we have better tools. iPods, YouTube, Facebook, Google, contact lenses, EpiPens, life-saving vaccines, and cancer treatments. People like talking about the good old days, but how good were they when you didn't have modern dental tools, flush toilets, and you died young? Also, how good were the good old days for people like Ellen DeGeneres, Ricky Martin, or any gay person? Not very good. In fact, the good old days were not so good for most women. When I was a kid, women had to get their husband's permission to get a credit card or to take out a car loan. As these old ads show, a woman's job was to stay home, take care of the husband and children. A woman's Secretary of State or governor, not conceivable. And the good old days certainly were not good for blacks or interracial couples. They used to be persecuted. For people like them, life in America has gotten much better. So maybe tonight's optimists are right. Maybe free people will overcome this stuff, these horrible freedom-killing rules, and America will have a wonderful and prosperous future. Sure hope so. And that's our show for tonight. Good night.